This week on Act Out, hold on because we are diving deep into the fucked fact files to bring you a list of bills, filings, laws, and proposals that directly and overtly attack our First Amendment rights to speech, press, assembly, and petitioning our government. From state-sanctioned hit-and-runs to laws against laughing, we are outlining a long list of creeping authoritarian-style moves made to intimidate, silence, and destroy those fighting for justice. Also on the front lines, we take a look at the fight for Net Neutrality 2.0, recent and upcoming actions, plus what you can do to save the internet. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. For those of you familiar with the First Amendment, you will know that it supposedly guarantees free speech, plus the right of the people, that'd be you and me, to assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances, which means that we have a right to go to our government officials and say, hey, excuse me, this right here, it's fucked up. One of the tactics used in the strategy of petitioning the government, as it were, is protest. Now, protest tactics vary, from the large-scale permitted protests or marches or indeed parade-like events, to smaller protests where no permit is necessary, i.e. where you don't block traffic or entrances to a building. And then, of course, there's the blockade-type protest, where you don't get a permit and you are definitely shutting shit down. In the course of this show, we've discussed and analyzed the efficacy of all of these tactics at various times, but today my intention is more geared towards looking at new legislation that very pointedly and directly threatens the aforementioned First Amendment, rights to speech, press, assembly, and petitioning, i.e. protest. And this isn't about whether you agree with this tactic or that one, it's about whether you feel the government should be allowed to threaten people with economic devastation, prison, and even death for speaking out, standing up, and demanding justice. Everybody strap in because this is going to be one hell of a fucked fact dive. You may have heard that in January of this year, the North Dakota House introduced Bill 1203 that would protect drivers who accidentally hit and kill protesters. State legislators were so damn sick and tired of those water protectors camping on land stolen from the indigenous people leading the movement to protect fucking drinking water from oil companies that they just had to send a strong message. Think like a Ford truck commercial directed by Tarantino and set in an updated version of 500 plus years of colonial genocide. And while the bill was voted down in the House in February, it's important to note that only 51 lawmakers turned it down. Yeah, that's right. The vote came out to 51 noes and 40 yeses. That's a disgustingly close vote for something that allows you to fucking murder people for not only exercising their constitutional rights, but for arguing that clean water should be a human right. And not so very side note, that shit has already started leaking. On April 6th, the not even fully operational pipeline managed to leak 84 gallons of crude oil in South Dakota. Leaving aside the question as to why you'd be pumping fucking oil through a non-operational pipeline, it isn't supposed to be operational until June 1st, why are you even pumping that shit in the first place? 84 gallons may not seem like a big deal, but before you dismiss it, ask yourself this. Would you want 84 gallons of crude in your water supply? And if the answer is no, imagine getting run over by a car and that being legal. So if you're interested in seeing exactly who voted yes for the whack-a-mole protester edition, we created a bit link for you at bit.ly/nd_dickbags. But before you hit pause and focus all of your ire on the dickbags in North Dakota, remember, we've got a lot of ground to cover. Indeed, dickbags in North Dakota just wish they could be as effective as the dickbags in North Carolina, where on April 27th, the North Carolina House of Representatives approved legislation that would, quote, shield drivers from civil liability if they collide with protesters. Collide? Meanwhile, in Tennessee, SB 944, which has yet to pass either house, was introduced in February and similarly provides civil immunity for the driver of an automobile who injures a protester who is blocking traffic in a public right-of-way if the driver was exercising due care. Yeah, I see no problem in telling people it's okay to hit protesters so long as drivers can convince a crotchety old judge that they really didn't mean to, Your Honor, honest. Speaking of traffic, in Iowa, Senate File 111, which was introduced in January and is currently in subcommittee, suggests sentencing highway protesters to 5 years in prison. The Senate filing's sponsor, Senator Jake Chapman, claims that he's just a concerned guy. But fellow Senator Joe Bolcom pointed out that there are already laws on the books that deal with the obstruction of freeway traffic. But I guess Chapman is just so concerned that he can't allow those poor helpless proles to go wander the freeways. He's got to lock them up for their own safety. Meanwhile, Iowa Rep. Bobby Kaufman must have felt outdone in the caring department because he introduced House File 226, which not only sets a hard $1,000 penalty on obstructing highways, but targets anyone who might have had a hand in organizing, scheduling, or assembling people for such an action. Anyone deemed guilty of the above verbs will be slapped with an aggravated misdemeanor. Again, sure glad that that's not purposefully vague. And speaking of misdemeanor ramp-ups, in February of this year, lawmakers in Minnesota introduced House Filing 390 that would grossly inflate the penalty associated with obstructing highways. After Philando Castile was executed by a cop in July of last year, protesters took to the highways and blocked traffic in protest of continued police brutality and the white supremacist injustice system. Fast forward to January of this year, and lawmakers suggested turning a misdemeanor offense into a gross misdemeanor, upping the fine from $1,000 to $3,000 and tacking on a year of jail time. Republican sponsor Nick Zerwas explained the reasoning behind the decision. Quote, "A misdemeanor has not been a deterrent to keep people off freeways, to keep people from closing down airports, so hopefully a gross misdemeanor will, where someone is actually booked and actually spends time in jail." Yeah, Nick, that's solid logic. Instead of addressing the system that murders and imprisons thousands of black men and women every year, give it a boost by imprisoning the people protesting imprisonment and murder. Now that's the kind of stupid that even duct tape can't fix. And not only that, but Minnesota lawmakers also introduced House Filing 322, which allows the government to, quote, "sue to recover costs related to unlawful assemblies and public nuisances." Yeah, you read that correctly. Nicknamed the Profiteering from Protest Bill, 322 targets those convicted of participating in an unlawful assembly, any person present at an unlawful assembly, or any person committing public nuisance. That means you'll have to pay the state and or city back for your tax money that was spent on policing you at a protest or public nuisance, whatever the fuck that means. I mean, who's to say that the guy in the subway singing Justin Bieber as loud as he possibly can isn't a public nuisance? Because to me, that's a fuck ton more annoying than someone standing up for basic human rights. Meanwhile, what about money paid out to the victims of police brutality? No one wants to sponsor a bill on that? In fact, Representative Ilhan Omar brought up that very issue to Zerwas during a hearing, even asking him to co-sponsor a bill that would make police who engage in excessive force responsible for their payouts to victims. Zerwas did not have a response for that. Meanwhile, Philando Castile's friend John Thompson also attended a hearing on 322 to make it very clear why such measures like blocking freeways were being taken. "My friend's blood is on the streets of St. Anthony," shouted Thompson. "It's a crime to be black, to be a black man driving down the street. That's why we protested." As of the taping of this show, both 322 and 390 have yet to be passed. Moving on along the economic tip, in November of last year, Washington Senator Doug Ericsson introduced Senate Bill 5009, aka the Preventing Economic Disruption Act, aka if you protest, you could be slapped with a Class C felony. Not only that, but the bill seeks to, quote, "punish people who fund and organize destructive protests." again with the organizers, because clearly every protest always goes specifically as planned, and even the organizers who might be anti-property destruction or anti-blockade could totally vouch for what hundreds if not thousands of people do, which is of course the point. Can't control a protest crowd? Don't have a protest. As with other bills, and it's almost like these rotting pus bags are sharing legislation. As with other bills, Ericsson claims that he's only interested in protecting people and private property. But as is the case with the other bills, or even like bills like HB 2 that claimed their aim was to protect defenseless women from other women in the bathroom, the real reasons are fear and hate. Hate for trans people, hate for blacks, hate for those demanding a better life, and fear that other people will fucking listen. I guarantee you that you could torch the homes of 10 protesters and Ericsson would care about as much as Trump cares about accuracy. This is about trying to save money for the companies that stand to lose millions, if not billions, due to direct action initiatives by protesters who are kind of more interested in air and water than whether or not this used colostomy bag gets a new yacht this year. As of April 24th, the bill had been reintroduced in the Washington Senate, where it has yet to go to a vote. Now, despite the slow pace of legislative action, some of these fascist bills have come up for a vote, and in the case of Oklahoma, they've passed. Earlier this month, Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin approved a statute that dramatically increases penalties for protesters who trespass on any property containing, quote, a critical infrastructure facility. Now, Oklahoma is the home of the pipeline crossroads of the world and therefore has veritable shit tons of oil and gas infrastructure. The details of the bill mean that, quote, individuals will face a felony and a minimum $10,000 fine if a court determines that they entered property intending to damage, vandalize, deface, impede, or inhibit operations of the facility. Should the trespasser actually succeed in tampering with the infrastructure, they face a $100,000 fine or 10 years of imprisonment. Also in the crosshairs again are the evil co-conspirators. Any organization found to be a conspirator with the trespasser is liable for a fine 10 times that imposed on the intruder, as much as $1 million in cases involving damage. Once again, vague language such as intend, impede, and found to be a conspirator provides authoritarians with a legal goodie bag to effectively jail and prosecute whoever they want. Now, on the marginally bright side of things, some of the bills that have come up for a vote have in fact lost. The aforementioned North Dakota Hit a Protester bill being one of them. Another example, in Colorado, the bill to increase tampering with oil and gas equipment from a Class 2 misdemeanor to a Class 6 felony has been indefinitely postponed in the Colorado House. In Arizona, a bill that would have allowed asset seizure, like, for example, your house, if you were involved in a protest that happens to turn violent, died in the Arizona House in late February. And some bills have changed. Like in January, Senator Dan Bishop of North Carolina announced that he would propose legislation making it a crime to threaten, intimidate, or retaliate against a present or former North Carolina official in the course of, or on account of, the performance of his or her duties. Bishop said that he would seek a 5-year prison sentence after former Governor Pat McCrory was met with protests during a trip to D.C. where people yelled shame and called him a bigot for, being a bigot. As of mid-March, the amended bill in committee seeks to provide protection in the form of highway patrol officers to elected officials for the period of 1 year after they leave office. And that's still fucked up, because, first of all, don't fucking run for office if you don't want to be in the public eye, and two, really the most important part, don't be a fucking bigoted pile of toxic fascist shit if you don't want people calling you out on it. Unfortunately, however, this sort of pedestaling of bigot protection, the safeguarding of soulless sociopaths, is another new trend. Indeed, you may have heard just last week that a reporter was arrested after pressing Tom Price on whether domestic violence is a pre-existing condition under the AHCA. The question stems from the fact that under the AHCA, insurance companies can deny coverage based on personal medical histories. So, for example, suffering PTSD after rape, or domestic violence. On May 9th, journalist Dan Heyman was charged with willful disruption of the governmental process for following Price and repeatedly asking him the question that he refused to answer, while nothing was in session, by the way. His news agency had to post $5,000 in bail, and Heyman faces up to 6 months in jail for freedom of the press or something. As Think Progress reported, this is not the first time that Trump's regime has cracked down on free press, both physically and legally, although it might be the most egregious. Be it bruising reporters during the campaign, or most notably perhaps the 2 reporters arrested on Inauguration Day, who then faced felony rioting charges for covering the events in the streets. And although charges against those reporters were later dropped, many activists who took part in the J20 actions are facing decades in jail and thousands in fines, along with their homes being raided by local law enforcement, where nothing's seized, but entire apartments are ripped apart. In other words, raids with the express purpose to destroy and intimidate. Keeping it constitutional, D.C. also slapped a Code Pink protester with a conviction of disorderly or disruptive conduct for laughing during the Sessions hearing in January. She'll head back to court in June along with 2 comrades who were also arrested but ultimately not convicted because they were disruptive before the gavel kicked off the fascist fiasco. Meanwhile, back in North Dakota, hundreds of protectors are stuck in the injustice system, facing long legal and financial battles. A recent Truth Out article, which we will link to, outlines a variety of cases, along with Indigenous and allied lawyers working to fight them, along with inherent colonialism, racism, and the corporatism that these cases represent. To stay up to date and indeed to donate to their work, visit waterprotectorlegal.org. I told you it was going to be one hell of a fucked fact dive. For those of you who passed out from anger, exhaustion, or surprise along the way, we will hold on this screenshot of our collected bills so that you can see where they're at and whether or not they passed, so you can stay up to date on the overt dismantling of our First Amendment rights. So take a screenshot, share, and spread the word, because again, this is not about whether or not you agree with this tactic or that tactic. Outside of the more glaring issue of free speech, press, and right to assemble, this is about whether or not you believe that our governments are better suited for jailing and fining the people rather than actually addressing their concerns. Indeed, I'd like to point out that it'd be a whole lot easier to avoid freeway shutdowns, broken equipment, and clogged streets by actually addressing those grievances rather than putting up more literal and figurative roadblocks to resolving them. Extreme measures are being taken precisely because of the extreme lack of redressing. As Thompson shouted in that hearing, his friend's blood is in the streets. And as the murders continue, as the drug war ramps up, with stricter sentencing and harsher charges, as everything from voting rights to First Amendment rights are systematically strangled or erased, our actions must also ramp up to meet the demands and realities of our situation. I mean, do you honestly fucking think that we have nothing better to do than block traffic? To lay down on the ground or in the bleached hallways of the powers that be? To get dragged around by roided up oafs, to get tear gassed and pepper sprayed, to lock ourselves to each other, or to fucking bulldozing equipment. To have to honestly consider pissing our pants because we refuse to just get up and walk away, feeling it more necessary to hold that space than to use 20th century fucking bathroom technology. We do not do this shit because it's fun. We do it because it's necessary. We want clean air, clean water. We want people to stop dying because of the color of their fucking skin. We want a future that isn't marred by fascism. And our stance on these and other basic human rights is non-negotiable. Until we get justice, you will have no peace. For there to be rest, there must first be unrest. And I cannot nor will I speak for other activists, but I can sure as shit speak for myself in saying that no matter what bullshit legislation you throw at us, we will always outnumber you. And we will always fight. And the more your fascism rises, the more anti-fascist you will create. And to those of you sighing in your cars, irritated by disruption, ask yourself what you find more egregious. That your commute got fucked, or that some kid died. That you are inconvenienced, or that 500 plus years of colonialist genocide forced a pipeline through thousands of people's drinking water. Consider your human and civil and First Amendment rights in jeopardy because they are. To all of you and to the powers that be, see you in the streets. Speaking of streets and being in them, you may have heard that the battle for net neutrality must once again be waged because of unbridled assholery on the part of telecoms and their minions. One such minion, Ajit Pai, is now the FCC chairman. This former Verizon lawyer has announced his plans to dismantle net neutrality beginning as soon as May 18th, which is tomorrow from the air date of this show. Now, if you want a more detailed recap on what net neutrality is, check out Lee Camp's rundown from this past week. You can also check out John Oliver's resurrection that managed to, once again, crash the FCC comment site, despite the fact that the FCC claims that they were hacked. I guess so, if by hacking you mean that so many people visited your out-of-date site to complain about having to complain about this shit all over again, then yes, you got hacked. In a nutshell, net neutrality keeps the internet open, as its name suggests. It requires that both telecoms and government approach the internet in a content-neutral manner, i.e. they can't restrict access to a site or make you pay extra for certain content. Pai and friends want to shut that down because there's a fat paycheck on the other side of selling the people out to big telecoms, obviously. Having beat back the gutting of the open net once before, activists are re-energizing their efforts to take on Pai, his lies, and the telecom giants. This past weekend, activists held a vigil outside Pai's house in a special Mother's Day action aimed at raising awareness for the battle to save the internet. On Tuesday, activists also staged a creative action highlighting the uselessness of computers without access to the internet, and let me just tell you, it is wildly cathartic to smash a computer. Tomorrow, Thursday the 18th, activists plan on staging a sit-in at the FCC during the public meeting where again Pai plans on beginning the process to undo net neutrality. Now, this might not sound very sexy or exciting, but consider the implications of a closed internet. As Margaret Flowers, MD, who co-directs Protect Our Internet, said, "The internet is fundamental for participation in society, whether it is applying for a job, doing research for school, applying for healthcare, or starting a new business. I urge all families to join us in protecting internet freedom so that no person is left without access to this vital necessity." Access to the internet is perhaps the most uniting issue of any that we have today. So to get involved, visit protectourinternet.org, and to file your comment with the FCC, visit gofccyourself.com, courtesy of John Oliver & Co. Here in the land of the free, it's all about choice. So many ways to be dying, so many ways to be poor, just keep trying. So many ways to want more than you need, just keep lying to yourself and the truth as it stares into you. The abyss, deep soul rift, the selective collective, the groupthink, the mass mind that won't find or can't find the way to be free. In the land of the free, it's all about angles, the sharp, jagged tangles that slice at the life that you built just in spite of the odds that were stacked. Here are the tracks, and we, the 99, are always on the wrong side. The social slip slide, the capitalist ride. If they come in the morning for you, I'll be next that same night. Where's the fight? Lying splintered in ashes, the smoking gun fascists that turn us against us, then laugh as this crashes. Our movements come screeching to a halt. Who's at fault? The ones who hold strings, or the ones who stay puppets and fight in their rings? Here's the thing. In the land of the free, you're always free to be all they tell you to be. Left or far right, the aisle gets thinner while the fat cats get fatter, the two-party lines intersected, and meanwhile, people sit glazed, feeling lost and dejected, apathetic, nihilistic, too tired to be the defected. So effective, the songs selling freedom, the bombs buying peace, and the dumb keeping wisdom. In the land of the free, it's all about chains. And the only real change is the sense to lay waste to the cents on the dollars, the markers of horror, the shift now to rise above all these lies, above that fake freight that they place in your way. When you go to rattle thrones in the land of the free. Rise up and go rattle some thrones. That'll do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Be sure to check out the last slide and/or description to see the sites mentioned in this week's show. And be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.